Aside from the Catholic seat of power, the Vatican City, the Philippines is the only country in the world without a divorce law. This is a controversial bill in the country, as pro-life and pro-choice groups clash against each other after the recently signed reproductive health law. Figures from the Office of the Solicitor General show that the numbers of nullity cases are consistently rising from 4,250 in 2001 to 10,528 in 2010. Statistics also show most cases were filed by wives coming from marriages 1 to 5 years long. Supporters of divorce in the Philippines believe that this is the legal remedy to unhappy marriages and abusive relationships. Anti-divorce lobbyists, meanwhile, disagree, saying that divorce as an option would be subject to abuse. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. The recent Synod of Families in Vatican City tackled controversial issues concerning families around the world, and among those is separation. It echoes to our nation as we wait the visit of Pope Francis and as the last bastion of Catholicism in Asia. Tonight we ask, will divorce damage Filipino families? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. Joining us tonight in our discussion is Attorney James Imbong, family law attorney and general counsel of the St. Thomas More Law Center. Good evening, Attorney James.
Good evening, Rod.
Yeah, what is your position on this? Do you think that divorce will destroy families?
Okay, the answer to that question, Rod, can be seen with in relation to the nature of this proposal, no? And we know that this proposal is not new. Because this experiment, we call experiment of divorce, has been tested in many countries, okay, especially particularly in the US, in Europe. And if we do a quick research in the internet, you type in divorce, the word divorce and effects, you will no doubt see that it is filled with reviews and results and reports that it has brought on a wrath to the societies where the divorce laws are being implemented, particularly with regard to the parents, the children, and the cascading effect on many aspects of their social life.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney James. And on the opposing side is Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, Executive Director of Engender Rights Incorporated. Good evening, Attorney Claire.
Good evening, Rob.
Yeah. In 30 seconds, can you sum up your position on this? Do you think divorce will destroy families?
Definitely not, because divorce is actually for those with broken marriages already. So with that, I would say that for those who have healthy family relationships, this is not an issue. But for those where there is abuse, especially with my clients who are women victims of violence, they definitely need divorce. Because Article 36, psychological incapacity, is inadequate, it's inaccessible. So in a sense, for broken families, this will actually be helpful because it will end the violence that's been happening in the family. So to me, it would actually even protect the sanctity of marriage because the healthy marriages would still stay safe and intact.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney Claire. So I'll just call you James and Claire. Just to make it for brevity, you know. All right, let's start off the first question, James. I think a lot of people are approaching this from a legal standpoint, maybe even constitutional standpoint. But let's ask first on the moral standpoint. No? Is divorce? Do you think that divorce is morally acceptable, and or do you think it's a disrespect to the sanctity of marriage?
Yes, truly, no, because when we talk about the term morality, we all know as lawyers there are two aspects to that. There is a religious morality and a public morality. Right. In terms of religious morality, there is no doubt. If we're speaking to Catholics or Christians, there is no doubt that marriage as an inviolable social institution, which was raised into a level of a sacrament. Okay? There is no doubt, if we're preaching to the choir, there is no doubt that any form of legislation to break that bond, that valid bond, would be contrary to those teachings. With regard to public morality, I'm referring to, for example, laws that punish murder, stealing, theft. Without quoting any religious doctrine, these are our laws, and we don't oppose it. Why? Because there is some order upon which these rogue actions are being punished. No?
And you think divorce is a rogue action?
Yes, so in terms of public morality, if we even look at it in the aspect of the morality in the sense that controls or order, or let's say the stability of society, the inviolability of the marriage bond, as we know it now, is really considered very serious, and
so
the Constitution protects it.
Yeah, the immorality lies, in your opinion, or at least your position, the immorality lies in the fact that you vowed, and I guess you vowed not just to your spouse, and I guess to the authority, and maybe to God. Is that the basis of the immorality, where you're breaking a vow?
Yes, you can call it immorality. You can use the word immorality, but the essence here is that the laws of our country, particularly the Constitution, reflect the value of that social institution which is called marriage, because it is the foundation of the family.
Okay. Clary, do you think that it's morally depraved to even talk about divorce or propose divorce, in your opinion?
Well, if you talk about marriage, if you talk about the family code, there should be love, respect, and support, right? But when there is violence, there is abuse, psychological, verbal, financial abuse, then there's no more love, respect, and support. So
the whole basis of marriage is gone.
So
Okay.
it's inexistent already. There's no basis for them to be married. And what I see from experience is that it is usually those who have tried everything. They have gone through family counseling, marriage counseling, and it's after everything else fails that they actually seek legal help. So in that sense, I would say that it's not an issue of morality. As I've mentioned, when there is abuse, there's no marriage to speak of anymore.
In other words, you don't think that a wife who's being physically abused, for example, it's not immoral for her to be seeking protection by way of divorce? That's what you're
Definitely
saying?
not immoral. To me, it's an issue of human rights. It's an issue of ending gender-based violence. It's an issue already of when you talk about human rights, then you talk about a person who is free from violence, she has the right to privacy, sacredness of her life, where she's able to be, she's empowered, she's able to choose what to do.
Yeah.
And in cases when there is abuse, definitely you would see that the women are not empowered enough to even seek legal help or seek even counseling. So in that sense, I would say that we really need divorce in a sense to end violence and discrimination that's happening within the family.
Okay, that seems to be the focus now. You think that it's immoral for a wife, for example, James, for her to seek protection under divorce? Because let's just say that she doesn't have the basis of Article 36, no, the psychological incapacity, and we'll discuss that in a while. But let's say it's violence, it's happening, and but at the same time she still wants to get married to the right guy. You know? Don't you think that? Do you think that it's immoral for her to seek divorce, given the circumstances she's in?
Well, actually, when we speak about the element of divorce affecting the inviolability of marriage, no? Our Constitution declares it in a sense that there is a very practical and foundational need for it to bring in, let's say, a judgment of immorality, to either to support or oppose this proposal.
So there's already a basis why they put the word inviolable.
Yes. In other words, the language of our laws, and that's the basis of all our actions, the language of our laws reflect a very practical, social, and foundational element or intention. No? And that's why what the state intends to protect, it should, and what it can correct, it must. So I'm addressing the so-called problems relating to domestic violence, to the women, no, to the wives. No? In that case, there are laws precisely to handle situations like that, like the VAUSI and even the revised penal code. But to destroy the institution that the state even protects higher than our individual preferences.
But Attorney Claire is saying that that institution you're trying to protect is already in a context of violence it's in the context of physical abuse, financial abuse, and perhaps infidelity. Let's say that that's a circumstance now of that particular institution. I mean, we can call it all we want, no? Institution or,
Yes.
or maybe a foundation, diba? Or a inviolable institution. But if that's the context of the marriage, do you still feel that divorce cannot in any way be allowed, even if we have that term in the Constitution if it's in inviolability?
Yes, Rod. Remember, what we are protecting is the institution itself.
The institution itself.
It's the institution. So it's the same thing like we know
not that particular marriage.
Yes,
that's what you're
for
saying.
example, this may be a lame analogy, but we have many accidents, deaths arising from driving cars or motorcycles. But we cannot ban them because there is a practical and valuable, they're valuable assets. Society moves around transportation. So what do? We have laws, red lights, reckless imprudence. If you damage someone, you can be sued. But to ban that altogether and destroy that very valuable thing that contributes to society defeats the purpose. So the same with marriage. There will be 1, 2, 3, 4 marriages run by a husband or wife that has no sense of to be a parent, but still the state says, and they put it, we put it in our Constitution, that we recognize marriage as the foundation of the family, and the cascading effect is the family is the foundation of our nation.
Claire, what do you say to that? Basically, James is saying that we shouldn't allow divorce because then it impacts, even if it's just a couple of marriages or maybe a percentage of marriages, but if you allow one marriage to be, I guess, terminated by way of divorce, it basically violates the institution itself. It I guess, defeats the whole purpose of having that institution. Do you think that's the case? Do you think that by terminating certain marriages, maybe a percentage of marriages, it violates the inviolability of
personally, Rod, I'd like to say that that's actually misleading because even with the Catholic Church, if you consider the Catholic Church, the canon law actually has 3 grounds to annul a marriage, whereas for the family code, we only have 1 ground, which is psychological incapacity, right? So for the church, they actually have 2 more grounds, which is lack of sufficient reason and lack of discretionary judgment. And I've actually reviewed their decisions, actually this thick, and I was actually surprised because they're very lenient.
The church is even more lenient.
Church annulment is very lenient throughout the world, including here in the Philippines. And I'm actually surprised because I've even spoken to some priests, the matrimonial judges, and they've actually they've been saying that marriage is actually other-orientedness. So they're very lenient in the sense that if they see that the other person is not other-oriented, it's not self-giving love, they would consider that marriage as annullable. Like it would be annulled. So in that sense, I would say that divorce is actually just a form of the church annulment if you consider Catholic Church. But even here in the Philippines, you actually even have for Muslims, under the family code, there's divorce, right? So if you talk about equal protection of the law, there's no equal protection of the law for Filipino Catholics, right? Because there's no divorce. So in that sense, we're not even just talking about morality here, but constitutional issues, constitutional guarantees.
That's a good point, and we'll start with that point when we return. In the meantime, we need to take a short break. You can join the debate via Facebook at facebook.com/opposingviews on 9TV or tweet your thoughts at opposing_views. Use the hashtag OVDivorce. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. We have with us Attorney James Imbong, family law attorney and general counsel of the St. Thomas More Law Center. And on the opposing side is Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, executive director of Engender Rights Incorporated. Our debate question for tonight: will divorce damage Filipino families? Now, before the break, Attorney Claire made a fine point that at least perhaps we're 80%, 85% Christian or Catholic, right? I think that's safe to say. But there's a percentage of our population that's Muslim, and under the Muslim code, they have divorce, right? And so your point was, prior to the break, was why constitutionally we should have equal protection of rights, right? And why is it that 80 or 85% of the Christians and Catholics don't have the same, I guess, privilege or benefit of having divorce? Attorney James, your thoughts on that point?
Yeah. Well, it's not really my thoughts, no. It's the Constitution again, no?
Okay.
The simple explanation to that is that we recognize the Code of Personal Muslim Laws, and as we know, no, their laws are based on their very rich tradition, and the Constitution mandates the state, no, to respect and preserve the cultural and tradition of communities in Mindanao, no. That's the basis of allowing that. So the reason why there is divorce in terms of Muslim law is not because we want it or it is their right, but because that is their religion, that is their culture. Now,
and under the Constitution, we should protect that culture.
Yes,
that's what you're saying.
Yes, and that's the simple explanation. To bring in the equal protection question would mean that it's either we are not arguing on the realm of what the Constitution says, or it's possible that if you have any intention to amend the Constitution, but as the Constitution stands...
Are we then providing more priority to culture over morality? Because if we're arguing based on culture, you're giving precedence to culture over morality.
Well, simply because culture is already there. We're talking about the exception mentioned. In fact, that is an exception. That's an exception. So when we bring in the issue of morality with regard to the tradition of the Muslims, I think that would be an improper position.
Do you think that... yes.
Rod, actually, if you remember, in law school, it was taught to us that during the Japanese period here in the Philippines, there was actually divorce.
Right.
So regardless of the Constitution, 1935 up to now, it doesn't really matter because before, divorce was already here in the Philippines. In fact, one senator, Arturo Tolentino, was actually able to avail of divorce during the Japanese time, right? So it's not a question of the Constitution.
That's a very dangerous...
In terms of equal protection of the law, I would also argue that there's also no equal protection of the law because in some cases, even with the law now, for example, Article 36, you would see that some petitioners would win their cases, some would not win their cases, right? A lot of cases are on appeal. A lot of cases were denied by the Supreme Court. So in that sense, some of the cases even that were denied by the Supreme Court actually even said that even with domestic violence, even with intimate partner violence, there's no proof that there's psychological incapacity. I would say that that's very dangerous for us to say that even with proof of intimate partner violence, some of our jurisprudence is now saying that that's not psychological incapacity.
That it's all right. It's all right to do it.
Right, that it's all right to do it. And we say that definitely any kind of violence within the marriage should not be sanctioned by,
not be tolerated
by our courts.
Okay, James, your thoughts on that?
Yes, sorry, Rod. I was about to interrupt because
you were going to make a
the statement of Attorney Padilla is very dangerous.
Why is that?
Had it been said by a non-lawyer, we would tolerate it. But to say that it doesn't matter what constitution we have, and simply because some 50, 70, 80, 90 years ago, under some regime that doesn't have a very good history with regard to human rights, had some divorce in our land. But as of now, as we speak, under our oath, we know that deep inside our hearts of hearts, the Constitution protects the institution of marriage. And the words of we do not need even to interpret that or even cite jurisprudence.
Rod, we would have a problem.
That's why I'm very disturbed.
We would have a problem because the Catholic Church actually in the past was, during the time of the Inquisitions, we all know that there were wars, etc. So that's not an issue. What I'm talking about is actually Constitution vis-a-vis law. And Constitution vis-a-vis law the argument does not follow.
So you were saying at the time there was a ban on divorce, and yet we had a law that allowed divorce. Is that what you're saying?
There was no ban on divorce. The law actually allowed it. The Constitution
Did not
prohibit it. So
prohibit.
the argument
But however,
on Constitution...
we are talking about the 87. We're under. I think the point
right.
of James is we're currently now under the 87 Constitution.
Right.
So therefore,
but still, there's no argument with regard to the Constitution now, which prohibits divorce.
So you're saying we should change the Constitution now?
No. We don't even need to change the Constitution because we have Article 36. It's allowed. We have, as I've mentioned, we have the Muslim Code, etc. So under the same Constitution, our Constitution now, I'm saying that we can argue on equal protection of the law. We can argue on right to privacy. It has been held in many jurisdictions around the world that the right to divorce is actually a right to privacy. We can argue on non-establishment of religion, that any kind of church should not be established in our case, which means that arguing that a certain kind of religion prohibits divorce should not even be a sound argument if we argue on the non-establishment guarantee of the Constitution. If we argue on freedom of religion and belief, then freedom of religion and belief would also not...
should also be protected. All right. I'll shift gears a bit, James. Let's shift to the numbers, the sheer numbers of those seeking nullity, of their marriages. It's steadily rising. I think we know that. And also, as we mentioned in the introduction, except for the Vatican, we're the only country now that doesn't have a divorce law. Now, do you think that those facts, the fact that we're the only ones left, even Spain, which brought Christianity here, it now allows divorce, and with the rising cases of nullity, do you think that this is a compelling reason to at least consider divorce?
Okay, first of all, Rod, it is okay to follow trends. Like if there's a new cell phone or there's a new technology in other countries, we follow it, or else we lag behind. But when it comes to things that involve foundations of societies, and such as the family, we have to think twice and really think hard and research. That's why I mentioned in the beginning, I made reference to the experience by other countries with regard to divorce laws in their country. And I'm telling you, the only thing you will hear from that side is one track, and that is the ill effects or the damage done to society. And we're talking about not just 5 years experience, we're talking about 40, 50, 60 years of divorce law in their area.
Claire, do you agree with that? Based on James, if you research the internet or research, basically, you will find the ill effects of divorce in society in all of those countries that have a divorce law. Do you agree?
Well, I would argue on international law rather. For example, we have ratified conventions. We have ratified the CEDAW Convention, that's the Women's Convention. We have ratified the Convention on the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. And all of these conventions, they have actually recommended for the Philippines to enact a divorce law. So we're not talking about statistics here. We're talking about ratification of laws. We're talking about Philippine obligations. And under international law, we are duty-bound to actually respect the treaties that we have ratified, which are actually, since 2006, the CEDAW Committee has said that we should ratify, we should enact a divorce law in 2008. The Committee on Eco-Social Cultural Rights already told us as long ago as 2008 for us to enact a divorce law. So in that sense, regardless of any other statistics, I would say that we have Philippine statistics which actually say that in terms of domestic violence, we have recent statistics from the National Demographic and Health Survey, that's a 2013. And actually here, I would see that in the last 12 months prior to the survey, there have actually been 2 women out of 3 who were married who have suffered physical and sexual abuse. And they suffered injury by their spouses. Right, in the last 12 months. And if you talk about not just the past 12 months, for those who were married, there were 1 out of 4 women who actually suffered emotional, physical, sexual violence. So that's a lot.
Okay. Yes, on your point on international law, I'll throw the ball to you, James. Should we follow these international covenants which we signed? These are international laws and conventions and agreements that we are part of. Can you address that point
Yes.
of Claire regarding that?
Well, first of all, I was hoping she would answer your question regarding the ill effects, but she wasn't able to answer that. Going to your question, Rod, no, I did not get high marks in constitutional law in law school, but one thing I am sure of is that under the preamble, it says that we, the sovereign Filipino people, it says there, the sovereign Filipino people intending to establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations. So there is a basis in the way that we should
more pervasive basis
interpret it. Yeah, the Constitution doesn't say that we, the sovereign Filipino people, subject to international agreements. No. In fact, the ideals and aspirations of the Filipino people make our nation
unique,
the bastion that we are so proud of it to be. And we all know that our citizens who are in other nations, they influence the history in their countries, no? Simply because, not because they changed allegiance, but if you take their roots, they are Filipinos, and we bring that ideal and that aspiration, and the protection of the family is one that they envy. You know, Rod, in the U.S., I worked there for 3 years. They envy what we have. That's why they cannot even change their law, the federal jurisprudence with regard to divorce. So what they do, they're trying to go through
state by state
to protect the marriages.
Now, I'll ask you, James, and then I'll ask you, Claire. Now, do you think the church, I mean the Catholic Church, of course, is influencing too much on the legislation of divorce? Do you think that it's wielding its influence unduly?
Well, first of all, when you talk of the church, I'm a member of the Catholic faith.
Church, yeah.
So I can lobby, I can influence my congressman. But when you talk about, maybe you're referring to our priests, our bishops. Take note, Rod, our priests, our bishops, our leaders, church leaders, they only have persuasive powers. They don't have, they don't control legislation in a way that, as we know, there are tit for tat in our system. No? So in other words, the movers behind any lobby against divorce are people like me. In fact, and if I may correct Attorney Padilla, unless she is a canon lawyer, the position of the church on separation of couples is based on the premise that there's no valid marriage in the first place. That is the basis of the church annulments that we hear. I am not a canon lawyer, but I know that the church will never allow a valid marriage existing to be broken.
All right. We'll take it. We'll have to pause at that point, and I'll allow Claire to respond after the break. Keep tweeting and posting comments on our social media pages. More issues regarding divorce in the Philippines when we return. You're watching Opposing Views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Our guests for tonight, Attorney James Imbong, family law attorney and general counsel of the St. Thomas More Law Center, and Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, executive director of Engender Rights Incorporated. Our question: will divorce damage Filipino families? Now, just before the break, Attorney James was making a point. I guess addressing your point, Attorney Claire, regarding that the church has actually three grounds, no, for annulment, which is two more than what our own laws or the family code provides. No? And he was making a point that he's not a canon lawyer, but as far as he knows, there's no instance where the church will terminate a valid marriage, meaning it's all about a marriage that's been void from the very beginning. No? So I'd like you to, if you respond to that.
In my experience, I've actually reviewed a lot of books on church annulment, particularly the matrimonial tribunals of the Catholic Church. And as I've mentioned, I was surprised because they were in my
Your
view,
mind.
very lenient. Lenient in the sense that they were considering the other orientedness of the person. They were considering self-giving love. So in that sense, anything that falls short of self-giving love, other-orientedness, I saw that they actually annulled the marriages. Now, if I talk about...
You think it's just terminology? You think that ultimately they were just really terminating it?
In that sense, it's the same as Article 36, but actually more lenient,
More lenient,
in my view, when I was reading all those books.
In other words, the reasoning you're saying that the reasoning was more of, okay, there's violence, there's self-centeredness and
self-centeredness, immaturity. There were a host of reasons,
and therefore this is a basis for terminating the marriage.
Definitely, they included immaturity, abuse, alcoholism, drunkenness, etc. But in some of the Supreme Court cases, you would see that some cases actually were denied, even alleging some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Now, I'll ask this question. I'll shift gears again. Do you think, Claire, and I'll ask James the same question, do you think that the law, a divorce law, would be prone to abuse?
Honestly, I don't think so, because it's the women and men who actually seek for, well, in our sense, Article 36, they're actually the ones who tried to mend the marriage. Somehow they went through counseling. So in my view, it won't be prone to abuse, because these are actually people who have, in fact, at present, broken marriages, and to them, having lack of access, inadequate access under Article 36, having a lot of cases being lost, to me, providing them with divorce is actually a sense of relief for them. It would be a sense of closure, and it will actually protect the rights of women who are actually abused in cases where there is pervasive domestic violence that's happening.
James, do you think that the law would be prone to abuse? Like Britney Spears, for example, gets married and then next day, I don't feel like it anymore. And then,
Well, I don't know about Britney Spears, but...
I'm sure you're not an authority, but maybe that's an extreme example.
But I know what you mean, Rod, no?
But do you think it can happen if you have divorce, that people will just get into marriage just like that, and because they know that there's an escape
let me put it this way, because that question is really loaded, no? But you've been to a circus and you have these people balancing on the wire, no? And then they do all these things in the air, no? If you notice, you take away that net under, you take it away. People won't be jumping or flying as much, no? The point here is that when potential couples come into marriage and commit, enter a vow, knowing that they can be divorced later on then that defeats the whole purpose of making the vow. So at the end of the day, it's not even about abusing.
They're saying marriage is like a tightrope walk.
Yeah, no, it's not even about whether it will be abused. The fact that you put divorce, it is already an element to destroy that thing which they're trying to enter into.
In other words, it already provides the way to make something supposedly inviolable, violable. All right. Now, based on your stand, why would you rather stay in the marriage than that you hate so much, for example? You know, then be divorced and be free from it. I mean, let's just assume it's put yourself in the shoes of someone, an abused wife, for example. Why would you rather stay in a marriage that there's so much abuse, and let's say you don't have the grounds for annulment? You know,
let me answer it this way, Rod. No? If you notice, and you can ask on your own, maybe Attorney Padilla, no? If you notice, the best counselors with respect to whether it's drug addiction, divorce, failed marriages, or let's say juvenile delinquency, these are people who are actually in the middle of that crisis. You ask who are the best marriage counselors, they're couples who have gone through that possibility of giving up. And those statistics, those personal experiences are proof that despite our frailty in terms of committing, in terms of sustaining love, no, there is an answer, and the institution itself provides that environment. Because if you remember, if you break a marriage through divorce, you just don't break the couple's relations.
You're breaking the institution itself.
Not just that, Rod, the in-laws, the extended families, which in our culture we also preserve. So imagine, you don't just break a marriage, you break bonds that are sources of support for that marriage that is so-called hanging on a precipice. But the point here is that the element of giving up on a marriage, that's reality. That's reality.
Yeah, so
but it doesn't lead to the conclusion that you destroyed the institution itself.
Yeah. So Claire, I think the point of James is, in a way, you trivialize marriage by providing that escape door or escape hatch. No? Do you feel that that's the case? We're trivializing marriage now, and marriage was supposed to be, and I mean, traditionally, at least us as Filipinos, it's very sacred, and it's supposed to be inviolable. And there are ways naman to, as mentioned earlier by James, ways to avoid being physically abused. Vowsy, for example, the Vowsy law, and legal separation, for example.
Well, actually, I've seen too much domestic violence that's been happening in the past 20 years in my practice as a lawyer. So I would say that it's not trivializing marriage. I would say that when there's violence, abuse can be emotional, verbal, psychological, physical, sexual, financial. I've actually been counting the cases that we've handled in one organization that I was with. We were actually handling about 75 women abused a month. So that's a lot of domestic violence that's happening. So it's not trivializing. On the other hand, we're actually making women safe by providing them an accessible access, which is not costly, accessible in the sense that we are not relying on judicial interpretation, accessible in the sense that we uphold constitutional guarantees. So to me, it actually even protects the sanctity of marriage, where people with healthy marriages will stay married. But for those who actually made a mistake in the past, I would really say that divorce is the answer for these kinds of broken marriages.
Okay, James, let's focus on that. No? The fact that people do make mistakes. Sure, we can view marriage as this inviolable institution, this sacred foundation of society. But people do make mistakes, and they want to correct that mistake. And under our laws, at least, well, for annulment, obviously, as mentioned by Claire, no? Annulment, sometimes the protection is not there, because you have to prove psychological capacity at the time of marriage. But sometimes problems arise during marriage. And now, do you think that it's right for us to punish people and not allow them to get married anymore, just because they made that mistake?
Well, to answer that bluntly, again, I will stress that there are some matters that the state protects on an institutional level, because these are very foundational elements that make our society work. So again, my analogy of cars that lead us to accidents, but we need these things. And it may sound trivial, but but the family institution, the bond itself, is protected by the state. And a second, Rod, what was not mentioned ever in our discussions was the fact that this pending bill, I think 7, has no guarantee, not even guarantee, but it overlooks the very obvious and practical fact that, assuming the divorce law is implemented, the person, let's say the husband or the wife, who has availed of a proper divorce decree, can actually remarry. But the purpose of their divorce, and according to the statistics of Attorney Claire, is mostly because of domestic violence by a husband to the wife. So what we're doing is we're passing on.
We're perpetuating another.
Perpetuating a further crime. But I'm not. This is not mean to say that the current wife should suffer. No. As we mentioned, there are existing laws, and there have been implementations, very good implementations of these laws protecting women who are abused in their marriage.
Yeah, I'll go to that, Claire. No? Legal separation. Let's not talk about annulment. Annulment is obviously, you mentioned it's a little tougher to get. You have to prove psychological capacity at the time of marriage, which is a little tough, a little bit expensive. But let's say legal separation. You just be separated, and so you get protected from the abuse.
Well, it falls short of empowering, for example, an abused woman, because she stays married. She wasn't the one who was. She's not the guilty party, and in a sense, she's actually penalized for marrying, for making the mistake of marrying an abusive person, and then she's not allowed to remarry. So that's a problem. Actually, Rod, I'd like to discuss issues related to, for example, the Catholic, in this sense, if you talk about Catholic Church, it's not monolithic. If you take a look at the whole world, the Philippines is the only nation that does not have divorce. But in a recent research here in the Philippines by the Catholics for Reproductive Health, they actually saw that many nuns and lay persons, lay leaders actually believe, 2 out of 3 nuns actually say that,
nuns?
Philippine nuns, they actually agree on a divorce here in the Philippines. So this is actually good news, because here you would see that it's not monolithic. Even here in the Philippines, there are some Catholics who would say that they are pro-divorce, others are not. But still, we are a country of varied religions, and we should be governed by secular standards. So in that sense, when we say secular standards, we should not, we should be discussing public good and not based our laws on religion, beliefs, etc. Because precisely, our laws should be secular in the sense that it should cover everyone.
Okay, that's a good point, but we need to take a short break, and I'll ask Attorney James his comments on that last quote by Attorney Claire. When we come back, the final points of our guests and the results of our ongoing online poll on the issue. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Still with us, Attorney James Imbong, family law attorney and general counsel of the St. Thomas More Law Center. And the opposing side is Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, executive director of Engender Rights Incorporated. And our question for tonight: will divorce damage Filipino families? Now, right before the break, Attorney Clara is making a point that in recent surveys that you've conducted, even with nuns and women, the general consensus seems leaning towards allowing or them favoring a divorce law, no, to allow protection of women. Attorney James, do you think that this is an issue of, I guess, majority? Let's say, let's just say that majority of people are beginning to lean towards a more secular law, not based on what the Catholic Church teaches, and they're leaning towards more now allowing divorce, no? Just being at par with all the other countries. Do you think that that's a basis for us to reconsider this law?
The good thing about this issue, Rod, no, that assumption doesn't exist. Because had it existed, then Congress would have passed a law, or let's say amended the Constitution.
Do you think the lawmakers are listening to their constituents?
In other words, the status quo for the past how many years and how many constitutions is that the argument in favor of the sanctity of marriage is still exists.
Okay.
Now, with regard to the surveys by nuns, now the last time I checked, the Roman Catholic Church values the sanctity of marriage. So unless there is some publication or report on to verify that survey report, then I guess these nuns would be guilty of heresy, no? It's simple as that.
Maybe that's their opinion lang, no? Personal opinion.
Yeah.
Now, I'll ask this to Attorney Claire and James. Now, will the situation change for couples if children are involved? Let's say, sometimes we know, diba? We know that couples sometimes stay because of the children. And that's usually the reason. Do you think that changes the dynamic, or you think, no, children or no children, the principle remains the same?
Yes, yes, because, well, first of all, with regards to the reason why they don't have children, that's besides the point. But since we're now talking about children involved in a relationship wherein a possible divorce law exists, let me also stress this, the studies in other countries is that divorce begets divorce. They have statistics where they can now predict what kind of profile of a family a certain child would be if the child was a product of a broken family out of divorce. And that's the Western experience. But we know here in the Philippines, again, no, our very special culture that we protect is that the reason why certain marriages work is precisely because they know that there's something beyond their demands of happiness or I want to be happy in a marriage. In fact, the path to that happiness, if they don't get it between themselves, meaning the husband and wife, they now transcend that and look at the value that
it will pass on to
bringing on children, bringing up their children in an environment where there's a mother and a father, how that will contribute to the lasting marriage itself.
All right, Claire, there is an argument no, that we shouldn't have divorce because for the sake of children. What are your thoughts on that?
On the contrary, in many of the cases that I've handled, it's actually the children who persuade their mothers to leave their husbands.
Most of the cases.
In a lot of the cases, because they've been experiencing the abuse, they would see it, they would witness the abuse, the husband or their father abusing their mother, or sometimes the father hurting the children. So in a lot of the cases that I've handled, it's actually the children who persuade the mothers to file for either vowsy case or to nullify the marriage. And it's usually, sometimes even the mother decides, after seeing that her child was actually beaten up by her husband. So in a lot of cases, it's actually trying to maintain safety and peace and order in the sense that she would want to dissolve the marriage precisely to provide peace for her children.
Do you think, though, that the whole point of this divorce debate or the pro-divorce argument really hinges on the fact that most women, despite what they went through, the violence and all that, still want to have a second chance in love and marriage? You think that's ultimately, because if it's protection, as pointed by Attorney James, we have the vowsy law, which you just quoted right now, and there's also legal separation, and of course we have all of these other, restraining orders and legal remedies, so to speak, to protect you from the violence. No?
In many of the cases that I've handled, I would actually even see that they wait for their children to finish college, and that's when they actually decide that they would leave the husband, the abusive husband. So it seems that they would, even with abuse, they would suffer silently. But once they are assured that their children they have graduated from college, some actually decide to start seeing themselves in a new light, and they would see that this time it's for me. I should finally file for nullity of marriage, and it would be happy if their petitions are granted, right? But in certain cases, as I've mentioned, some of the cases were actually denied, and a lot are on appeal, and some are actually have been denied by the Supreme Court.
But again, going back to my question, do you think that those are not yet sufficient to protect the person? I mean, we still need the divorce law?
We need the divorce law, definitely, because, as I've mentioned, there's Article 36 is subject to judicial interpretation. That's why a lot of cases, some of the petitioners, they lose their cases, some are on appeal, and most likely will still be denied.
The same thing will happen in divorce. There's also a situation where the judge will not allow the divorce.
If we have a good divorce law, it can be no fault. It can be after separation of perhaps 2-3 years or something. If we have specific grounds, then it would not be subject to judicial interpretation anymore.
Do you think that couples should have the right? I mean, this is, after all, the state is not involved, in our daily lives, between a couple, right? The state is not really involved. Of course, technically, we sort of like sign the deal with each other and also the state. But at the end of the day, it's the couples that stay together. They sleep together, and unfortunately, they argue with each other. No? And the couple doesn't argue with the state. So do you think that in a situation like this, when things are really just gone horrible, do you think that those parties who are really the ones involved should just be able to say goodbye and you get married and I get married to other people, and let's give ourselves a second chance? Well,
again, Rod, the answer to that, I will repeat again. No? The answer to that is already what the other countries are experiencing.
It's not a good
yes,
scenario.
It's easy to pass a divorce law. You just get the numbers in Congress. Okay, you bring it up to the Senate, it becomes a law. But the point here is that it will not change the fact that the end result of a law such as this has been very disastrous to communities. And when I say disastrous to communities, not necessarily because they are Catholics, Christians, Muslims, no. On a very practical, social, economic level. That's why in the past...
When you say disastrous, does it increase crime or in what way?
In fact, in several states, and you can Google this, in several states...
There's a correlation.
In order to determine the rate of juvenile delinquency, meaning minors committing crimes, you know what they look to? You guessed it right, the divorce.
So there is a correlation. All right. Unfortunately, we only have a final few minutes, so I'm going to ask both of you to say your parting words, final words. Again, this is all about trying to get all our thoughts together, providing, of course, a nice, healthy discussion on a particular topic, which is very, I would say, controversial to a lot of people, important to a lot of people. So I'll start with you, Attorney Claire. Can you give your final words to our televiewers and inform them of what you think, what direction you think that the country should go with regards to this issue?
Okay. Well, for me, I'd like to address the public. There have been bills filed on divorce. I hope that this time around we will support. Those of you who support divorce, please come out and talk to your representatives. We elected representatives in Congress, regardless of their religion, regardless of their beliefs, they should actually be our representatives. So for those who believe in divorce, please go to your representatives, the senators, and argue your case. All
right. Thank you very much, Attorney Claire. Attorney James, your final words.
Yes, I'm very sure that no one will doubt that this jewel that we have with regard to our culture and the way we value the family will not change simply because other countries are doing what we want to do here under the divorce bill. No? And that is our strength. Now, even if I have a neighbor, a couple who's always fighting, 2 neighbors, 3 neighbors, I know them personally, or even the cases handled by Attorney Padilla, which we cannot confirm because of the privilege of confidentiality, that will still not change the fact that we know that what makes our nation stable is because our families are stable, and because families are stable simply because the marriages upon which those families are based are protected not by personal opinion or surveys, but because we ourselves, under the Constitution, say so. And as of now, that is what we value, and it works for us.
All right. Thank you very much, Attorney James. So thank you to our guests, Attorney James Imbong and Attorney Clara Rita Padilla. Now, let's see the results of our online poll. We asked you, will divorce damage Filipino families? Those who answered yes, it will damage, yes, 60%. And those who answered no, 40%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on today's most relevant issues. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Good night. God bless. Happy weekend.
And support. So
the whole basis of marriage is gone.
So it's inexistent already. There's no basis for them to be married. And what I see from experience is that it is usually those who have tried everything. They have gone through family counseling, marriage counseling. And it's after everything else fails, that they actually seek legal help. So in that sense, I would say that it's not an issue of morality. As I've mentioned, when there is abuse, there's no marriage to speak of anymore.
In other words, you don't think that a wife who's being physically abused, for example, it's not immoral for her to be seeking protection by way of divorce. That's what you're
Definitely
saying?
not immoral. To me, it's an issue of human rights. It's an issue of ending gender-based violence. It's an issue already of when you talk about human rights, then you talk about a person who is free from violence, she has the right to privacy, sacredness of her life, where she's able to be, she's empowered, she's able to choose what to do.
Yeah.
And in cases when there is abuse, definitely you would see that the women are not empowered enough to even seek legal help or seek even counseling. So in that sense, I would say that we really need divorce in a sense to end violence and discrimination that's happening within the family.
Okay, that seems to be the focus now. You think that it's immoral for a wife, for example, James, for her to seek protection under divorce? Because let's just say that she doesn't have the basis of Article 36, no, the psychological. Aside from the Catholic seat of power, the Vatican City, the Philippines is the only country in the world without a divorce law. This is a controversial bill in the country, as pro-life and pro-choice groups clash against each other after the recently signed reproductive health law. Figures from the Office of the Solicitor General show that the numbers of nullity cases are consistently rising from 4,250 in 2001 to 10,528 in 2010. Statistics also show most cases were filed by wives coming from marriages 1 to 5 years long. Supporters of divorce in the Philippines believe that this is the legal remedy to unhappy marriages and abusive relationships. Anti-divorce lobbyists, meanwhile, disagree, saying that divorce as an option would be subject to abuse. Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. The recent Synod of Families in Vatican City tackled controversial issues concerning families around the world, and among those is separation. It echoes to our nation as we wait the visit of Pope Francis and as the last bastion of Catholicism in Asia. Tonight we ask, will divorce damage Filipino families? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. Joining us tonight in our discussion is Attorney James Imbong, family law attorney and general counsel of the St. Thomas More Law Center. Good evening, Attorney James.
Good evening, Rod.
Yeah, what is your position on this? Do you think that divorce will destroy families?
Okay, the answer to that question, Rod, can be seen in relation to the nature of this proposal, no? And we know that this proposal is not new. Because this experiment, we call experiment of divorce, has been tested in many countries, okay, especially particularly in the US, in Europe. And if we do a quick research in the internet, you type in divorce, the word divorce and effects, you will no doubt see that it is filled with reviews and results and reports that it has brought on a wrath to the societies where the divorce laws are being implemented, particularly with regard to the parents, the children, and the cascading effect on many aspects of their social life.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney James. And on the opposing side is Attorney Clara Rita Padilla, Executive Director of Engender Rights Incorporated. Good evening, Attorney Claire.
Good evening, Rod.
Yeah. In 30 seconds, can you sum up your position on this? Do you think divorce will destroy families?
Definitely not, because divorce is actually for those with broken marriages already. So with that, I would say that for those who have healthy family relationships, this is not an issue. But for those where there is abuse, especially with my clients who are women victims of violence, they definitely need divorce because Article 36, psychological incapacity, is inadequate, it's inaccessible. So in a sense, for broken families, this will actually be helpful because it will end the violence that's been happening in the family. So to me, it would actually even protect the sanctity of marriage because the healthy marriages would still stay safe and intact.
All right. Thank you very much, Attorney Claire. So I'll just call you James and Claire, just to make it for brevity. No? All right. Let's start off the first question, James. I think a lot of people are approaching this from a legal standpoint, maybe even constitutional standpoint. But let's ask first on the moral standpoint. No? Is divorce? Do you think that divorce is morally acceptable, and or do you think it's a disrespect to the sanctity of marriage?
Yes, truly. No, because when we talk about the term morality, we all know as lawyers there are two aspects to that. There is a religious morality and a public morality. Right. In terms of religious morality, there is no doubt. If we're speaking to Catholics or Christians, there is no doubt that marriage as an inviolable social institution, which was raised into a level of a sacrament. Okay? There is no doubt, if we're preaching to the choir, there is no doubt that any form of legislation to break that bond, that valid bond, would be contrary to those teachings. With regard to public morality, I'm referring to, for example, laws that punish murder, stealing, theft. Without quoting any religious doctrine, these are our laws, and we don't oppose it. Why? Because there is some order upon which these rogue actions are being punished. No?
And you think divorce is a rogue action?
Yes. So in terms of public morality, if we even look at it in the aspect of the morality in the sense that controls or order, or let's say the stability of society, the inviolability of the marriage bond, as we know it now, is really considered very serious, and so the Constitution protects it.
Yeah, the immorality lies, in your opinion, or at least your position, the immorality lies in the fact that you vowed, and I guess you vowed not just to your spouse, and I guess to the authority, and maybe to God. Is that the basis of the immorality, where you're breaking a vow?
Yes, you can call it immorality. You can use the word immorality, but the essence here is that the laws of our country, particularly the Constitution, reflect the value of that social institution, which is called marriage, because it is the foundation of the family.
Okay. Clary, do you think that it's morally depraved to even talk about divorce or propose divorce, in your opinion?
Well, if you talk about marriage, if you talk about the family code, there should be love, respect, and support, right? But when there is violence, there is abuse, psychological, verbal, financial abuse, then there's no more love, respect.